This one's on the Motorline. The Motorline has been one of those things that I've been kind of putting off for years, doing a Twin City Lines on it. And I kind of am coming around to it now where some future issue here, maybe this year. So this will be a little bit of a spoiler alert in the sense that Twin City Lines may come out sometime this year that has all of these very same photos in it, but bear with me. So anyway, here's the map of the horse car system and the Motorline. There's actually an error in here, which I never noticed before, which is the Motorline is this kind of dashed line. And, you know, of course, it came out of downtown on Marquette and then Nicollet Avenue, and it went originally to Lake Calhoun. And then in 1880, it was extended to Lake Harriet. And then in 1882, was extended out to Excelsior. And then in 1884, I believe it was, they extended it down Nicollet to 37th and across 37th Street to just beyond Hiawatha and the railroad tracks. And it ran out to Minnehaha Park and stopped where the Minnehaha Depot is. This, of course, was before there was another streetcar line to Minnehaha Park. And then I think it was 1885 or 86, I forget which, they did a further extension out to 50th Street right here, which was where the Washburn Orphanage was. And it shows it going down to the crosstown, which wasn't accurate. And so they originally, from their shops at 34th and Irving, they went across country, but as the street grid built in, they went in about 1886 or so, they did a reroute that took them up the alley there between Irving and James. And this, of course, became the route for the Como Harriet trolley. And then in 1884, they originally had a shop here with a little bitty roundhouse and a turntable on the east side of Lake Calhoun, but then they went and bought the property at 31st and Nicollet that became Nicollet Station and eventually Nicollet Bus Garage. So anyway, with that perimeter, you can see how it ran in relation to the horse cars. This little line here on Stevens Avenue was built by Minneapolis Street Railway to compete with them. And then Minneapolis Street Railway purchased them in 1886. And this little line on Stevens immediately went away. And some other things happened, which I'll get to. And so it was all steam powered. Because it was 1879, electricity was not possible yet. And so they used steam dummies, which were little steam engines that were designed with this fake car body on and covering on the wheels to try to not scare the horses. And so they started out with 2 of these, and they kept buying them as they got buying more of them as they got bigger, and the later ones were a little bit larger. So anyway, here they are at 34th and Irving. This is the Lake Calhoun Pavilion in the background. And just out of the picture right, there's a couple of pictures that were clearly taken by the same photographer at the same time. Here's another one. And here you can see what looks to be that little roundhouse and shop on the east side of Calhoun. Now, if you take a good look at the Lake Calhoun Pavilion, in, I want to say 1885 or 86, it was expanded, and they apparently didn't own this thing. This was Dorilius Morrison, who was like the first mayor of Minneapolis, and he owned it. But they added on to this and turned it into the Lindale Hotel, which is this. And that's where the Greek Orthodox Church is today. Oh. And this thing lasted until apparently about 1888. And I think it burned down. But you can see actually the old building on the right-hand side here, the same porches and all that. That's quite a construct.
Pretty classy.
And so here it is taking off across the open prairie there east of Lake Calhoun. And these were the initial cars. They were all bought used. And matter of fact, the steam dummies were also bought used. Later, they bought new equipment and a combination of that and used equipment. Here's another view. That was motor number 1. This is motor number 2. So this was kind of what they started with. And they ran about, every 45 minutes to an hour. Here they are at Lake Calhoun. This is the passing siding. And the way they did it, they didn't initially have a turntable there, and so they would just run around the train. So the train, he's facing northbound, and when they ran out of downtown, they'd run the train on the other end of the to the consist, and they'd back up. So the engines were bidirectional. And so they initially started at Bridge Square, which was where Hennepin and Nicollet came together at First Street. And then later they cut it back about a block and a half or two. And this is basically Washington and Marquette. They ran down Marquette. And here you see the siding for running around the consist then. And it says First Avenue South because Marquette was called First Avenue South at the time.
And this was 3-foot gauge, correct?
Yeah, thank you. This is 3-foot gauge. So when it was taken over by Twin City Lines and eventually electrified, they had to relay it as 4'8 1/2". So here you see the train southbound, and he's backing. This is now you see they're up to number 4. They got up to something like 10 or 12 on these motors. And it's, I forget what this building is, but it's passing 4th Street going south. And this was out of one of these bird's eye view maps. This is just a little piece of it, but it shows it kind of running down through this fully developed area. And what you see here is you see a lot of big houses. And because of the steam engines, which did disrupt horses, which did soil laundry and burn holes in clothes and that kind of stuff, and so some prominent people were had houses right along Marquette, and they hated this thing. And so from the very beginning, they were trying to find ways to mitigate it or make it go away. Now, after this is the junction at 31st and Nicollet, and the train is turning from Lake onto 31st, or maybe the other way, I don't. But this is where their 3 lines all met up, and they had transfers here. This is another view of that at Junction. This is one of their later coaches. They had larger coaches later.
It looks like, I was wondering what the wheel arrangement was for these things, and that looks like an 042.
That's what it is. They all were. But the later ones were a little bit bigger. They had a pretty good hill, still a pretty good hill, going up Nicollet to 24th Street from downtown. And that was always their big operating challenge, was to get up that hill. And so on Lake Calhoun, they decided that they should have a steamboat connection. And so they put the Hattie, the side wheeler, out there, and it ran for over a few years, wasn't very successful. And so what they wound up doing was they burned it at sea, and they advertised it and sold tickets to watch it burn. So the Hattie, or the remains of it, are somewhere on the bottom of the lake. And here it is. And now you're up on the bluff. Here's the passing siding, and you're up by the Lindale Hotel. Now, I found a thing on one of the Minneapolis history websites that there was something called the Mackwaw Club. And one winter in 1888, they built a toboggan run from this hill that crossed the tracks 15 feet above the tracks and crossed the parkway and wound up out on the lake. Pretty good toboggan run.
Wow.
And it was paid for by their members, and it was done for 1 year only. Nobody has any photos of it, but it was it was right here.
So there was a while back a photo that came out by email or whatever that was a toboggan run out onto the lake. And was that Calhoun or Harriet then?
That was Harriet. That was the one that took off just above the car barn.
Is this Harriet or Calhoun?
This is Calhoun.
Where would that be, that there's a hill that big on Calhoun?
Well, are you saying where would the toboggan run be? It would have been right where this photo was.
Yeah, well, I mean, where on Calhoun is a hill that tall on the side of the?
Coming down from where the Greek Orthodox Church is.
which
at
is,
30, at about 35th Street.
And Irving.
Yeah,
on which side, the east or the west?
it's the east side. That's the church with the golden dome.
I guess maybe it is that big. Right.
Yeah, well, it's, anyway, it was the Motorline that started the concerts and stuff at Lake Harriet. And so here you see Take the Motor, 10-minute trains. And this is the first pavilion, which was hard up against the tracks. And you can see it's dated 1888. And so here's a map that shows the line out to Excelsior. And as you can see, it does just pretty much what we thought. Now, I will show you some detailed maps from Electric Railways of Minnesota, because when the electric streetcar was re-extended out there in 1905, they basically used this right of way, but they straightened it in a number of places. But if you look at the inset maps, here was the Lindale Hotel on the east shore of Lake Calhoun, and here was their little engine house, which they did keep the turntable until 1886, because what they did is they bought 2 conventional steam locomotives, and the train would be brought out by one of the little steam dummies to Lake Calhoun, and then they would go and put the conventional steam locomotive on it and take it out to Excelsior. So those locomotives shuttled back and forth, and there was an engine change. And here's what you see at Excelsior. And they had a little turntable here. So they had a turntable on both ends to turn the conventional steam locomotives. So here are the series of maps from Electric Railways of Minnesota. And you can see when there's a dotted line, that is when the Motorline ran a somewhat different route. So this is France Avenue here. And it basically took off along Sunnyside Avenue to a point that it isn't a street, but there's actually an alley that runs right next to it, and there's a park in here. And so that defines the old Motorline grade. And then it ran like Twin City Lines ran for a while. And then out to Hopkins. Now, what they don't show is the Hopkins Overpass was built for the electric cars. So this would have had to cross the tracks at grade, all of these tracks. And I'll come back to this map because the Great Northern later took this thing over, but I'll show you how that works. And here there's an inset. This is Deep Haven Junction. And so the Milwaukee Road and the Motorline both came out here side by side, and the Milwaukee Road took off for Deep Haven, and later Twin City Lines came back and purchased that right of way, including all the way to Deep Haven. This insert shows the Milwaukee Road going off and shows the Motorline making kind of a dog leg here. And where the electric cars went is currently the right of way of Excelsior Boulevard. And this is old Excelsior Boulevard down here. Okay, so here we are going from Glen Lake. This is Glen Lake here. And this is Highway 101 today, Clear Spring. And here you can see once again, this is the Deep Haven line up here. But here you can see once again, they straightened out the Motorline, which was shown as a dashed line. And so this takes it from like, I don't know, Vine Hill Road or points west of that into Excelsior. And at Excelsior, you can see they had the little turntable. It's shown a little differently than it was on the map. Now here's one of the 2 conventional steam locomotives. And this, by the way, is after it got turned. It came out on the tracks in front. It ran around its train on the center track, and then it ran down the spur track to the turntable, got turned around, and now it's posed. And so this is Excelsior Bay behind it. And here's one of the 2 of them, and it has just come in. This is their little freight car that they did haul packages and stuff on, although the bio that I've read of it, the history said they didn't do much freight business. And this building right here is called the Motorline Pavilion. And they did launch a ship called the Clyde And I don't think this is the Clyde. I don't think I have a picture of the Clyde, but for a while they launched a steamboat on the lake, but it was very top heavy and people didn't like it and they sold it pretty quickly. It went to some other place. But this is really the only photo we have of one of their trains at the station. Now, they later expanded, they built kind of an enclosed area underneath the Motorline Pavilion shed, and here you see the track. And here's their schedule going out there. And so you can see they were going out to Lake Calhoun, about every 45 minutes or so. It was a little bit of an uneven schedule. This, except Sunday, was referred to as the businessman special. That was, and as you can see, they only ran, they ran a couple of trains beyond Lake Calhoun to Lake Harriet. And then they only ran, it was here, 6 trains a day out to Lake Minnetonka during the summer. They cut that down to 2 trains a day in the wintertime. Now, ultimately, the Lake Minnetonka service didn't last. It was there from 1882 to 1886. And it was because it was about 80 minutes to get out there, 75, 80 minutes, something like that. And you could get out there on the Minneapolis and St. Louis in about 25 minutes. And so one newspaper article I saw said people kind of liked riding the Motorline because, you know, it was this breezy open air ride. But if you wanted to get there in a hurry, you took the Minneapolis and St. Louis. So they were trying different things to mitigate the steam on lower Marquette Avenue. And this is 1885, and then again in 1886, they attempted a pioneer electrification using the patents by Van de Poel. And this is a little Van de Poel locomotive. I think this train is kind of fanciful. The locomotive had one axle powered with one 40 horsepower motor. And I'm not sure it would move any of this, but they attempted it and it was not successful. And yeah, Jim, you asked about an overhead wire, and they did have an overhead wire. Here's another picture of it. Once again, this is down at 4th Street. And so all they would have done is shuttled from Washington up to like 6th Street with this, but it was unsuccessful. So when that did not work, they heard about something called soda motors, where Baldwin, the big locomotive manufacturer, some guy had come up with a patent that you could charge a tank with essentially gas I think it was like baking soda almost, I don't know. There was some chemical reaction and it would run. And so they bought 4 of these things new, but A, they didn't work very well, and B, the exhaust, turns out that in the exhaust was lye, and the lye went out and killed all the plants and trees all along the street. So they converted these things to conventional steam motors, and here you see one of them at 31st Street converted to a steam motor. So that didn't work. So when that didn't work, then what they finally wound up doing, and they did this for the rest of the time before, the 4 or 5 years before this was electrified, is they wound up stopping the trains at 7th Street. They built this train is stopped at 7th, and they took the cars one at a time and put 4-horse teams on them and dragged them the rest of the way down to Washington with horses. So, I should explain, and apparently 1885-86, the Motorline ran into financial trouble, and John Pillsbury and James J. Hill bought it and double tracked it and increased the service and bought more engines and bought more cars. And then a year later, Minneapolis Street Railway, which is to say Tom Lowry, took it over and ran it until it was electrified in 1890. So 1886, they get rid of the line out to Excelsior. And I'm going to flip back to those maps because the Great Northern took it over, but they didn't take it over east of Hopkins. The Great Northern built a spur off their main line down to Hopkins. And that spur is basically the right of way now of 169. And it's got some parkland and a trail on it. And so they picked it up here and they standard gauged it and ran it all the way out to Lake Minnetonka. Oops, there we go. And they used the spur to the waterfront. And you can see this is a Great Northern train. See how much bigger the coach is? We also have a photo of one of their steam locomotives on it. And so just east of the end of this spur, basically where Highway 7 is, they built around the south side of Lake Minnetonka through Zumbra Heights and all the way to St. Bonifacius and all the way out to Hutchinson. And that lasted until, I want to say, about 1902, when they extended their line, their North Shore line from Navarre, from Spring Park through Mound to St. Bonifacius, and abandoned the line around the south side of the lake and all the way back to Hopkins. They kept the spur to Hopkins to serve industries. So that was about 1902-03. And then in 1905, Twin City Lines bought it back from the Great Northern and did their extension from Lake Harriet out the Motorline right-of-way, over the new right-of-way that the Great Northern had, and then they widened it and standard gauged it. So it's kind of a complicated history.
Look at how that spur track runs right up to the side of the building
Yep,
with a little stop at the end of the rail there.
yep. So anyway, along comes electrification, and Twin City Lines put all the stuff up for sale. You can see they got horse cars on here as well. 62 12-foot horse cars, which were the smallest ones, built with fare boxes and small conveyors. And the small conveyors, where you'd get on the back of the car and there'd be a little incline thing that you'd put your nickel in, and it would roll to the front into the fare box, so you didn't have to walk up to the front to do it. Plus 76 extra small conveyors for their bigger cars, plus fare boxes they're selling. And from the Minneapolis, Lindale, and Minnetonka, 12 steam motors, the 2 locomotives, 21 passenger cars enclosed, and 34 open cars and some flat cars. So these are the open cars, and they didn't have a whole lot of luck selling much of this. A lot of it got scrapped, but they sold a little bit of it. But they took the open cars and they re-gauged them and motorized them and turned them into open cars. And here you see one of them at Lakewood Cemetery. And they sold 3 of the coaches to the new North St. Paul Railroad that ran from the east side. It met the streetcar on the east side of St. Paul and went to North St. Paul. Later became the St. Paul and White Bear. And then the Twin City Lines wound up essentially buying this train again. This is one of the former soda motors that they sold to them. And once again, they had to standard gauge it. And here's a couple of artifacts that we have in the collection. Here's a pass signed by Colonel William McCrory himself from 1882. And this is a commutation book. And, you know, it must still be good because it says good until used. Oh, it's not good after 1884. Okay. And then, of course, the last surviving artifact, which is the old fence along the edge of the alley right-of-way just north of 34th Street, held in place with Motorline rail. And that's what we got today.